Thank you. So we are full house. So welcome everyone. Nice to have all of you on this big screen. We are running this live on 3 mediums. We have a selected audience who received this Zoom invite link. They are either our members from Sampriti or friends of your friends. The larger public is viewing it on the Sampriti Facebook page, as well as this is being live streamed on the Sampriti YouTube channel. So with your permission, we can start because we are almost on time and we have to cover perhaps a very important few topics on this. So I think we can start with your permissions. Great. Thank you. I take it as a yes. So earlier this month, it was 80 years since Rabindranath's passing away. And Baishe Shrabon evokes so much of Bengali emotions that we set aside our best memorials and tributes in the poet's honor. But Rabindranath had a very affectionate mentee as well, and we all know who he was. And he was one of the greatest Indians ever as well by his own rights. But we have been living his memories packaged in a shroud of mystery and mired in controversies. Yeah. And that is where I think, ladies and gentlemen, the person that I'm speaking about today is nobody other than Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. I want to welcome you to another edition of the Anita Dialogues. This time, it is in the middle of the week to specially coincide with 18th of August. 18th of August, we know, is that fateful day of the Taihoku air crash. And therefore, for the next 90 minutes, we will seek to decipher some of the facts, the circumstances, and the truth behind that incident. We know we cannot change history, but we can definitely attempt to discover and establish what the truth was. And like every time, it is my privilege to co-host this event together with Dr. Anita Bose Puff, the illustrious daughter of Netaji. She is with us right from day one. And she has herself, I must say, spared no effort to seek the officialization of this truth that has been in limbo for the last 76 years. We will cover those aspects as well as we come to the discussions today, but allow me to welcome her to this very special event. Anita ji, welcome. Any opening comments from your side?
Namaskar to all of you. I'm glad that you are joining us on this day and that you show the interest in Netaji's life and also his death. And I hope we will have an interesting meeting today. After all, I'm very grateful that 3 very renowned scholars and writers have joined us on this topic. Thank you.
Okay, she already mentioned about 3 very renowned scholars, but I call them a stellar cast of panelists because their erudition and informed opinion on Netaji will help us separate the facts from the fiction. They'll allow us to follow the evidence than just have blind beliefs. And of course, there has been a lot of clutter that has gathered over these years. And we will try to see how we can discover the clarity from the murky picture that we are portrayed. So without further ado, I will move to my first guest. And my first guest is no stranger to the Anita Dialogues because we are delighted to welcome you back to the Anita Dialogues since the second episode that you joined us in March, Dr. Leonard Gordon. Professor Gordon as I like to call him. He has a lifetime of works dedicated to Bengal because he has published Bengal, the Nationalist Movement, 1876 to 1940, in the year 1974. And in 1990, his book, Brothers Against the Raj, a biography of Indian nationalists, Sarath and Subhash Chandra Bose, has become the definitive Bible, I should say, for history buffs who look up for authentic information on Netaji and the period of Indian history. But I must say that in today's context, Professor Gordon's undisputed authority has been his painstaking research on the circumstances and the unfolding events around Netaji's plane crash. His first-hand interview of more than 40 years ago, I guess it was 1979, with the survivors and the witnesses to that incident are still very invaluable evidences for the resolution of this issue. So, Professor Gordon, welcome and thanks for joining us. You promised you will come back, and we are grateful that you are back with us.
Thank you.
Any opening comments from your side, Professor Gordon?
Well, 40 years ago seems quite a while, and I also have to mention right away that by a remarkable coincidence, Anita and Martin were in Tokyo for part of the time that I was in Japan in 1979. And Anita was present for some of the interviews that were conducted with plane crash survivors. And she also met General Fujiwara. And we should all honor Fujiwara Iwaichi as an honorary Indian patriot. I mean, we should remember that of all the Japanese, Fujiwara was the most friendly, accommodating, and helpful to Indian nationalism and to Netaji throughout. And after the war, when he became a general in the self-defense forces of Japan, he was very helpful. And I want to mention that not only to me, but to you, Toy, and to KK Ghosh, who've written notable books about INA and Netaji, Fujiwara was always there to help. And whatever I did in Japan, I could not have done it without Fujiwara. So let's remember him. And not only do we want to remember Netaji, but let's remember the best Japanese friend of Indian nationalism as well. I guess I also want to say this. I spent a month in Japan in 1979. I met a lot of Japanese military officers, some of the highest ranking of the Japanese military establishment. And the one person I became friendly with was General Arasue, who was the head of Japanese intelligence, 1943 to 1945. I never met a single Japanese military officer who did not believe that the plane crash took place. They had their own understanding. And I must say that many of these people, starting from Fujiwara, General Katakura, General Arasue, many, they said, why are the Indian people not taking the ashes of their hero from Renkoji Temple back to New Delhi to honor him appropriately in the place that he should be honored as a great Indian patriot? So I think maybe that's enough.
Thank you. Yeah, Professor Gordon, we will come back to a few of these points that we mentioned, but we are just going around for a round of introductions with the guest panelists, and hence we will come back to your point. And of course, those are a few of the questions that we want to also cover. And therefore, I will move to my next guest today, and who is no other than a very familiar face in Indian journalism, in Indian politics nowadays, and of course, on Indian television and print and electronic media. He did his PhD in history from SOAS, London, and then he was a research fellow in Oxford. For over 30 years, we have seen him occupy senior editorial positions in Times of India, Indian Express, India Today, and he has been also contributing regular columns in Times of India, Telegraph, Pioneer, etc. Since 2015, in 2015 rather, he was awarded the Padma Bhushan by the President of India and nominated to the Rajya Sabha as a member of Parliament. In Parliament, he is a member of the Standing Committee on External Affairs. And therefore, in this context of today's discussion, we can expect from Dr. Shobhan Dasgupta, whom I am introducing now, not only a journo's incisiveness to cut the clutter on this topic, but also an objective opinion from a member of a ruling dispensation who can provide insights into the officialization of the death issue. So with those few words, Dr. Dasgupta, we are pleased to welcome you to this edition today. Any opening remarks from your side?
Thank you very much. I know it's a very daunting challenge here to be able to cut the clutter, because one of the biggest problems one faces is not in the life of Subhash Chandra Bose, not in the achievements of Netaji, but in the circumstances which led to his disappearance, possibly death, on August the 18th. And this is really literally a minefield. Now, Professor Gordon mentioned that the fact that there is a certain degree of unanimity amongst the Japanese associates of Netaji that the plane crash in Taipei did actually happen. But you try and tell that here, you're likely to get caught in the most amazing controversy like this. And I'll broach that subject later once we get into the main discussion. But it's also complicated, and here I'm being very candid about it. It's also complicated hideously by the fact that along with this controversy over what happened on August the 18th is a subterranean family dispute, which makes it very, very difficult to actually tread an objective path. And all of it invariably gets politicized in some way or the other. So I'm just putting certain warnings and flagging off those things, because why, to answer that question, why is this still a live subject today in India when in large parts of the world, in other associates of Netaji, it appears to have been a closed issue a long time ago?
Correct. Thank you. I think those are very important words, because the thing that you mentioned, that why is it a live issue in India while it was a kind of a closed issue in the first few years after his death itself, therein lies the point as to how the things evolved and where the clutter happened. We'll come to that, because those are the areas which we are trying to decipher today together with your guidance and help of a panel like you. But I would like to come to the last but not the least, the third guest today, Mr. Shumeru Roy Chaudhary. Mr. Shumeru Roy Chaudhary is actually an architect by profession, but he's a Netaji scholar by passion. He is the pass out of IIT Kharagpur, and then pursued his higher studies at the University of Nottingham, and then retired as the chief architect from Government of India service. In this exposure in the Government of India service for 33 years functioning, he acquired that sharpness, he says, and the analytical ability to do the in-depth study of the declassified files on Netaji to reach the truth. He has found out and serialized the flaws inherent in all the conspiracy theories on Netaji's death. No wonder, therefore, he is a regular columnist on Netaji issue, and he makes it a point to correct the narrative on Netaji's death controversy on national TV, as well as relentlessly he pursues this topic on social media groups against fake and unsubstantiated narratives. Quite obviously, therefore, he has also written a book, and the name of that book is Russian Theory is a Fancy, which is one of the theories that he has perhaps chosen to pick up as a topic to quash. So welcome, Mr. Roy Chaudhary. Any opening comments from your side before we go to the core topic of today's evening?
Thank you very much. I wish this will be an interesting discussion today, and we'll come to arrive at some good results. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. So I know that we have a very distinguished panel. All of you are Netaji scholars. You know a lot of stuff, the minute by minute happening, the names of people, etc. But we also have a very live audience, which is going on Facebook here, and as well as it is being streamed live streamed on YouTube. So I will just like to go to the basics a bit, and therefore, because we have Professor Gordon and Dr. Anita Puff, I would like to take this opportunity of Dr. Leonard Gordon's research in order to relive that day, 18th of August, 1945. What happened before and what happened after that date? Would you be able to retrace for us the flight path, the fateful flight, so that the audience who perhaps is interested to know the facts would be able to understand it a bit better? Professor Gordon, if I may ask you to help us with that. I can give you a picture for that matter if you wish, so that it helps us understand it.
Okay, very good map. Thank you. Once it was clear that Japanese had surrendered, atomic bombs had dropped, I won't give my opinion about that. Another matter. You can see that what was then called terrain, which later became one of the biggest US air bases during the Vietnam War, was where they stopped overnight, 17th to 18th August. It was too late to leave. Early the next morning, they flew from Terrain to Taihoku Airport. That airport was later changed. I tried to go and search out that airport, and it's only used for some internal flights by the time I got there in 1979. I went there, I spent some time in Taiwan, trying to locate Japanese records, which I told were destroyed after the Japanese exited and were beaten in 1945, including what Dr. Yoshimi told me was a death certificate that he signed for Chandra Bose' death on August 18th of burns. Anyway, they got to Taihoku Airport, and then the plane had been overloaded in terrain. They had dropped some military equipment, machine guns and other stuff. Was still, in the opinion of some of the officers and pilot on board, too heavily loaded. When they got to Taihoku, they stopped for lunch. And then they were supposed to take off at 2 o'clock. Colonel Kono and another officer said that there was something the matter with an irregularity in the left engine of this plane. They thought they had sorted it out. At 2:30, the plane took off with the Japanese officers, General Shide, a very high-ranking Japanese military officer who was to take command of an army in Manchuria to eventually surrender to the Soviet Union. And Netaji was aiming to get to Manchuria to make contact with the Russians, according to many reports and in books written by his officers. The plane took off at 2:30. It only got perhaps 100, 200 feet up. Something happened to the left engine. Either the whole or part of the engine fell off. The plane headed straight down, crashed, broke into two parts. Fire set in. The pilot, Shide, were killed immediately. Netaji tried to get out from one end, then he tried to get out to the other end. Habibur Rahman said that he was splashed with gasoline. There had been a container of gasoline that the plane might need, which was near him. He was splashed with gasoline, and eventually, as he was trying to get out, he caught on fire. He had a tight sweater, tight boots, tight uniform. He got out. Several of the survivors, Rahman and other Japanese, said that he was on fire. He got out, tried to get some of this clothing off, probably didn't succeed, collapsed on the ground. Rahman tried to help him. Kono, who was one of the people I interviewed, said that he saw him as Kono was lying on the ground. He saw him on fire and said he looked like a Buddhist deity who was portrayed with flaming hair and a fierce face. The wounded were taken to the nearest hospital. Netaji was put under the care of Dr. Yoshimi. Yoshimi, who I went to interview in Kyushu Island in 1979, who was interviewed by the first two parliamentary commissions that investigated his death. Yoshimi said, as soon as he saw him, he saw how terribly he was burnt and wounded and didn't think he would survive. Nevertheless, through the hours from roughly 3 p.m. to 10 p.m., he was treated by Yoshimi and two assistant doctors at the hospital. There was a private in the room, Matsui, throughout, who I met on my way to Kyushu Island. And he heard some of his words. He said he thought, Mitsui said he thought he asked for water in a Japanese word that sounded like meju. Rahman later wondered whether this might have referred to Sharad Bose, Mejda. The doctors did their best. Both Rahman and Matsui thought that he said some words about Indian freedom before he died at approximately 10 p.m. that night. The body he had been wrapped in bandages. They tried to preserve the corpse. Then they found out the next day that there would have to be a cremation because there was no way to transport this body somewhere else. The body was taken to the crematorium and the cremation was carried out. The ashes were put in an urn. A few days later, the urn was carried by Captain Hayashida, who I also met en route to Kyushu Island, were taken to Tokyo. Eventually, they were turned over to an Indian organization in Tokyo, and then they were taken to Renkoji Temple, where many of us believe they are still sitting. I will say that the people I interviewed were Kono, Takahashi. This is Nonogaki, the one to my right in the group photograph, and to the left of Anita. and that's Nonogaki, and Kono is in the other photograph. These two officers had very bad burns scars. Now remember, this is 34 years later. I'm meeting them in 1979. These two guys had very severe scars from the crash, from the burns that they suffered from on that occasion on August 18th, 1945. Now, I want to say, before I turn this over to all the other panelists, the British were very concerned about whether they would have to deal with a live Netaji. Colonel Figgis, who was an important British intelligence officer, made a thorough report and investigation in early 1946. For whatever reason, that report was not made available to the public. In fact, I don't know whether it's ever been completely made available to the public, but was partially revealed in 1997. And I published part of Figgis's report in the Times of London in 1997. But in 1979, I got Figgis's address, wrote him a letter, and he wrote me a letter and said I was not allowed to keep a copy of my report, but my investigation showed that he died in the plane crash, and that's that. And that letter to me is quoted in my book. So the British were also concerned about what to do about Sharat Bose. They were not keen to release him until they were sure themselves that Netaji was dead. So they waited until sometime in September 1945, and then they decided to release Sharat Bose because they were convinced that he had died in the plane crash and was not going to come back and make trouble for them in case they would have to try him or whatever they would have to do. So they waited to release Sharat Bose. But once they were convinced that he was dead, they released Sharat Bose, who then entered back into Indian politics and was very important in trying to oppose the partition of Bengal as part of the partition of India. So let me just say in closing that Kono, Takahashi, and Nonogaki were three survivors that he interviewed. Matsui in the room when he died, Hayashida, who transported the ashes, Yoshimi, who treated him in the hospital. So to me, it's pretty convincing. Guys don't make up scars on their arms. They don't make up this kind of testimony. What is in it for them? And I have said, since I started studying about Netaji in Calcutta in 1963, if you got a document, show it to me. I say it again today. If you have a bona fide document, show it to me. I'm happy to read it. I'm a historian. I'm a Bideshi. I don't have a vested interest here. If you can persuade me that I am mistaken with the evidence that I have gathered and presented so far, I'm willing to look at it. Show it to me. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gordon. I think that was a good amount of details which you have captured. I just want to add here that we have tried to take your inputs with respect to creating the main on the plane, and that's how we created the list of people whom you met. And coming back to the point that while the sequence of events of 18th August is pretty clear, what's very interesting to know is that what happened after that, and what exactly happened in the days and months after the crash, how it was announced, what investigations happened. You mentioned something. Dr. Dasgupta mentioned about some parts of the international coverage and investigation. And that is where I think with a lot of the research that has been done by Mr. Shumeru Roy Chaudhary. Mr. Roy Chaudhary, if I can invite you to help us find as to what happened after this, how the news broke, and how the things panned out after that immediately.
Namaskar. Thank you. Actually, I'll take you through what happened from 18th August onwards. Most of us know that it was on the 23rd of August 1945, Japan informed the world of Netaji's death in plane crash. True. But many of us do not know that the Jap army informed the INA of the crash and subsequent death of Netaji immediately after the incident on 18th itself. General Bhosle, to whom Netaji handed over the charge of the INA at Bangkok on the 17th, received the first coded telegram of the unfortunate news at 11 p.m. that night, Bangkok time, followed by two other telegrams later, telling him that the cremation is going to take place in Taihoku itself, as the coffin did not fit into any plane. Next day, he communicated the news to some of his trusted colleagues and officers. So not only Bhosle, now about the five other Netaji's companion in his last flight, Devnath Das, Gulzara Singh, Pritam Singh, Abid Hassan, and Iyer, who were stranded at Saigon from 17th onwards till 20th. So on the 20th, when they were leaving Saigon, they got the news from Japanese officers who were arriving at Saigon. But they couldn't believe them, as they have not heard anything from the Jap authority. So one of the most must thing we should get rid of is the rumor that on 23rd August, Jap authorities fabricated the news. So it was not a fabrication. It was, that one was an official announcement. Now, because of the suddenness and right after Japanese surrender, like any other ordinary Indian, the Allied commanders too didn't believe the Reuters news, which was from the domain which was heard over the domain radio. So first, Admiral Mountbatten, on behalf of the British forces, sent a request to General MacArthur on August 30th, that means 18th and 30th, only after those few days, for an inquiry about the death of Netaji. The Japanese government submitted their report to MacArthur on 19 September. That is within 19 days. It was a preliminary report, and it stated that Bose was injured in an air crash on 18th August and died the same evening. Simultaneously, the British India government in that September itself sent their investigating team to Bangkok, Saigon, and Taihoku to investigate the same question. They also came back with the conclusion that as a result of a plane crash at Taihoku on at 2 p.m. around on 18th, Bose was seriously injured and died at midnight. So maybe, as Gordon was mentioning, maybe after getting this report, Sarad Bose was released from prison. Now, these two investigations clearly concluded that Netaji was dead, but rumors in India that he was alive and would return, and the popular support of the INA veterans unnerved the British. The Americans were that way more forthwith. In their War Department letter of 20th June 1946, they clearly mentioned that though there is no direct evidence of Bose's death, their intelligence division does not have any evidence that Bose is alive. They were absolutely clear. A third investigation was carried out by Colonel John Figgis, a senior British intelligence officer, between May and July of 46. Figgis interrogated, as Professor Gordon was saying, 6 Japanese officials, including the Japanese doctor Suruta, who treated Netaji at the Nanmon hospital, where Netaji was taken after the crash. Figgis submitted his report on 25th July 46, where he clearly concluded, if I can quote him, in the evening, Bose suffered a relapse And although the doctor once again administered a camphor injection, he sank into a coma and died shortly afterwards. The chief medical officer in charge of the military hospital at Taihoku was Captain Dr. Yoshimi. His testimony was recorded when he was imprisoned at the Stanley Prison in Hong Kong by Captain Alfred Turner of the War Crimes Liaison section of Taiwan in October 46. He too informed that Netaji died in the hospital the same night. Unfortunately, all these 4 reports were classified as secret, and therefore the people remained unaware, and speculation on Netaji's whereabouts in India continued.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Roy Chaudhary.
Yeah.
Do you mean that these 4 investigations were conclusive and clear, and if they had not been declassified, the news about Netaji's death would have been official as early as before India's independence?
Sure, it was. Do you think the Allies would have stopped chasing Netaji, who was their prime enemy? They were sure about his death. That's why they gave up the chase. Sarat Bose was released. All this. These things also goes to prove that he was no more, physically no more. Now coming to and I'll come to this 1955, all before India government came in. In 1955, when India government sought Japan's permission, here's is important, permission to conduct an inquiry in Japan into Netaji's death. Japan shared a detailed report in January 1956, comprising interviews with 13 witnesses, including Netaji's co-passengers and the doctors who attended on him. In addition to the description of the crash and details of passengers died and the map plane seating arrangement that you have showed just now, besides that, the report mentions that Bose's cremated remains were handed over to Mr. Iyer, and the articles, that means the treasures, left by Bose to Mr. Ramamurthy on September 8, 1945 at the Imperial headquarters in Tokyo. In the same year, in 1956 again, on India's request, the British government asked the Taiwanese government to interview employees of the military hospital and Taipei Municipal Center. So the Taiwanese government sent the eyewitnesses account of to the UK mission, who in turn sent it to India. The Taiwanese report of 1956 cast no doubt on the details of the crash or the subsequent death of Netaji. And now here, nowadays, some people raise a Taiwanese report of 2003 of not a Taiwanese report, a minister's comment, a minister's letter. Now here is a Taiwanese report of 1956, which the conspiracy theorists like to cover up. It clearly mentions, the Taiwanese report clearly mentioned about the crash and Netaji's death. They had interviewed the personnel of the crematorium and the hospital. These are the investigations done by the 6th investigation covered by international authorities. Now, the first Indian investigation was conducted by Harin Shah, a war correspondent of Bombay's Free Press Journal. Shah visited Taihoku in September 46 and published his findings in his book, Verdict from Formosa, that you are seeing now, The Gallant End of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. One of the highlights of Shah's investigative journalism was the testimony of a surgical nurse at the Nanmon Hospital who took care of Bose. Her testimony matched with that of Figgett's report. She also took Shah to the ward and the bed where she said Bose had passed away. Another important private investigation, that is of the defunct Indian Independence League, IIL, which was carried out by the officers of the IIL, and that was based on the circumstantial evidence and individual contact since 1946 and up to 1953. Their report came out in 1953, and they also concluded the same as the previous mentioned 7 investigations, but with a difference. They say the crash was not an accident, but an act of sabotage, because the Japanese could neither risk shielding Netaji from the Allies lest he resurface, nor hand him over and endanger relations with India. And I quote them, to save herself from the wrath of both India and the occupation forces, Japanese officials separated Netaji from 5 of his 6 associates and made the crash happen. Incidentally, I mentioned here that Japan still maintains 3 Netaji files as secret, while other countries have declassified them. Why? A big why for me.
So if I can take a break here and perhaps have a discussion with respect to these 6 theories before we go to the Indian investigations or inquiry committees, so as to say. I come to Dr. Swapan Dasgupta. Dr. Dasgupta, you were saying that all the international theories were in support of this. So can I ask the question that what prevented the first 10 years after Netaji's death to cement this issue? Any specific reason that comes to your mind that kept this issue alive rather than cement? The declassification, the classification being one part of it. Other than that,
well, I think, of course, the classification. I mean, I in most cases, classification hasn't yet been complete. It's still undergoing declassification in various parts. But I think, the main reason was a little political. That the news of Netaji's death was greeted with a sense of disbelief, particularly in Bengal. It was assumed that this Netaji, just as he managed to get away from Elgin Road in Calcutta in 1940, had once again staged something elaborate, a ruse, and is probably waiting in some way and would reappear at the right time. Now, what this belief was based on is not very certain, but that this belief was very real is undeniable. That it actually sunk in to the consciousness of a large number of people that here is this, and then this belief was peppered with a lot of further conspiracy theories that actually Netaji is not being allowed to return to India because of some elaborate conspiracy or some elaborate ploy by Nehru, in which the various parts of the Congress leadership were involved, because they didn't want to see him as a competitor. So this was the background in which first the question marks started appearing on this. Now the question marks were further reinforced by the fact, look, you've got to look at it in this way. August 1945, this was the closing stages of the war. In various parts of Southeast Asia, the Japanese were in disarray. And although the Japanese occupation was intact, the effect of the surrender was quite profound. It was only natural that there will be a lot of missing documents. Professor Gordon has quite rightly pointed out, show me a document. Now, I think here we have a situation where documentary evidence is going to be patchy. And I think the patchiness of the documentary evidence in certain parts, as opposed to the eyewitness accounts of people, and I think in most cases it's dependent on eyewitness accounts. And eyewitness accounts, as opposed to where is the death certificate? Was Netaji, the ashes, that of a private who died on the same day? Various questions like this started appearing in various days. Now, what is significant is that in the early stages, and I think it's quite right, and I think Mr. Roy Chaudhary has done a great deal of service by pointing to the early investigation which took place chronologically. If you look at it chronologically, you will find that the early investigations, whether done by British intelligence, whether done by American intelligence, whether done by the Indian Independence League or by the reporter from the Free Press Journal, they might have talked about a conspiracy whereby the plane was sabotaged. But they didn't talk about the fact that his death didn't happen. That's, to my mind, quite significant. These conspiracy theories started appearing post that. And it really took over once the sort of Shahnawaz Commission and all these commissions started. And in those various commissions, a lot of mavericks, if I may say so, did give evidence. And then it was further reinforced by the fact that a parallel theory went around that Netaji has reappeared in the guise of a sadhu. And that, it's very romantic story, charming story. And in Bengal, if you remember, there was this story of the Bhawal Sonasi, where people who had been assumed to be dead earlier had reappeared subsequently and fought a case and even won it. So in that sort of thing, what we had is a question of eyewitness accounts, some evidence which are documented, a large number of official reports, American, British, Japanese, and a popular belief, which was enormously strong, which of course testified to the sheer appeal which Netaji had, an emotional appeal which he had, particularly amongst Bengalis, but not exclusively also among Bengalis. That he had this great appeal, as this was the man who'd actually done it, who actually tilted the balance against the British Raj. So we must try and understand the larger context in which the theories about Netaji's fake death, staged death, his disappearance, his reappearance in another form have come about. And I think it's very pointed out that the patchiness of the documentary evidence has been seized upon by a lot of people to put in hundreds of question marks. And I think you will get question marks because you're not going to get a complete set of records about that, given the context in which in August 1945, particularly how the Japanese in Formosa, as it was then called, how they were in the last stages of retreat.
I have only one question here, and maybe Mr. Roy Chaudhary, you can take this because I would also like to perhaps play a devil's advocate here, just like the way Dr. Dasgupta mentioned about Yoshimi's death certificate issue. There is also I'm just going a few steps ahead, where there was a mention that the local newspaper did not cover the plane crash news. So how do you answer that? How do you dispel that doubt from people's mind that if there is a plane crash, why was it not covered? So, is it true?
No, absolutely not. Harin Shah in his book has clearly mentioned name of two newspapers, one Japanese and the other Chinese newspaper, which brought out the news of Netaji's death. Mukherjee Commission somehow ignored that part of the Shahnawaz Khan report, and rather the JMCI referred to another newspaper, which was a Kuomintang, which presently is a Taiwanese newspaper, but at that time in 45 was a Kuomintang mouthpiece, and it was being printed across the sea in mainland China. somehow, I don't know how he could make this mistake. He looked up a wrong newspaper, and since nothing came out in that paper, he said the crash didn't happen. Now, about this Japanese and the Chinese newspaper which came out from Taiwan, not only Harin Shah mentions one person, the other Japanese, I just don't remember the names. They also said that he read the news in that Japanese or Chinese newspaper, and a small obituary too came out. I would have come to this when I would have discussed the 3 Government of India inquiry reports.
Okay, so shall we move to those inquiry reports, because I think these are fairly clear that the first 6 investigations and the Harin Shah investigation is quite clear. But I will take a comment from Dr. Puff as well. Madam, anything from your side on this first 6 international investigations and the Harin Shah investigation? Anything that you feel is worthy to add in this?
Maybe just a very small detail, which probably was more important to members of my family rather than to the public. In our family, some of the younger people always sort of referred to my uncle Sharat Bose and also to my uncle Shurish Bose, who both claimed that my father did not die in the plane crash. But for some reason, I think some also misquoted him and Sharat Bose and said he claimed he knew that my father did not pass away. That's not at all true. In fact, in a letter which my uncle wrote to my mother, he wrote, "I have a feeling, and it's nothing more but a feeling that my brother is still alive." And one has to take into account that these 2 brothers were unusually close to each other. And I think for my uncle, it was to get the news of his brother's death was just devastating. And in a way, he just refused to accept that. And he was a very renowned counsel and lawyer. And he was reputed to be very good in cross-examining also. And in fact, he tried to sort of get at some information also by sort of inquiring from people like Habibur Rahman what happened in the direction of sort of getting evidence for this, for his brother's survival. My mother was another person who sort of hoped for his survival, but of course she was far away and had even less information available than my uncle. And my uncle definitely got some of this evidence which you presented before. That is, when he traveled to Europe, Harin Shah was with was in Prague at the time with the Indian embassy or legation. And when my uncle was there, Harin Shah came to see him. And Lenny probably knows this personal recollection of my cousin Dr. Shishir Bose, who was the 3rd son of Sharat Bose and who was along in Prague with him. And he told me once, and I'm sure he probably told Lenny too, that the story that Harin Shah told my uncle, which in essence coincided with what was released later, was very convincing indeed. But his father was so devastated about it, and one has to keep in mind my uncle Sharat was a very sick person at the time. He was suffering from severe heart problems. And so Shishir too didn't have the heart to tell him, well, accept it, but sort of try to downplay this thing. So my uncle kept hoping this, but partly he was used sort of as evidence, at least in our family, vis-a-vis some of the younger people who sort of doubted that that my father died in Taiwan at the time. That yeah, but how can you sort of oppose what Sharad Bose said? Where Sharad Bose did not say I know anything. He only said I have a feeling, and I think that feeling is understandable given the close relationship they had. It also explains why my mother, even though she heard about my father's death on the radio, and first accepted this, but then sort of also kept hoping, well, maybe it was another escape, like as you mentioned before, the escape from Kolkata, or for that matter, also his submarine journey to the Far East in 1943. So I think we have to keep in mind what the state of information was at different points in time. And as it was mentioned, the reports that were presented by Shumeru Babu were not known at that time. That's all for the time being.
Okay. While we are speaking, I am keeping a watch on the social media because, as I said, we are live on Facebook and YouTube, and because we have so many scholars here, I think we should dispel the misconceptions of the public straight away. And I have exactly a question to that effect, which I will take to Shumeru Babu and then to the rest of the panel. And this question is a bit advanced than what we are discussing now, but I want to take this question so that the public discourse gets corrected. This question is from Mr. Shumon Ghosh. Mr. Shumon Ghosh says, the Manoj Mukherjee Commission, being the third commission, clearly states that neither there was any plane crash in Taihoku on 18th of August, nor in that hospital as referred, any burn case was admitted. Okuro Kurosuwa was the only patient put there that night who died out of cardiac arrest. Who wants to take this question? I can see already Dr. Gordon and Shumeru Babu's eyes gleaming up. I leave it to you. Mr. Shumon Ghosh, if you are listening, you are privileged to get the answer from two very deep scholars here. Dr. Gordon, you want to go first, if at all?
What do we do with all the evidence that has been presented by myself and the other panelists? Should we throw it in the garbage? There's lots of evidence. This just goes against all the evidence that's been presented. Now, by myself, by the first two commissions, let me just say that Mukherjee, I met him at the British Library. He didn't want to know anything, frankly. He didn't want to know. And I said, this guy is dumb. And he doesn't want to know. He's made up his mind. He's not asking me any searching questions about the research I've done. So anybody who wants to rely on Mukherjee, who could not interview any survivors, because this is so long after the event, I can't help them. Sorry, I can't help them.
I just want to make a mention here. Justice Mukherjee is no more in this world. So in due respect of his soul, we will refer to this question to JMCI. So we will refer to the commission. Yeah. So the comments on the reply is with regards to JMCI. Mr. Roy Chaudhary.
I would like to interject now.
Yes, please.
This third commission was formed in 1999. That is more than 50 years after 1945. And although tasked to find out how, when, and where Netaji died, the commission could not provide those answers. A careful study of the report revealed to me and to the government also later on I checked that the commission made quite a few incorrect assumptions. Some of them are, as I was telling you just before, to your first question, earlier question, he considered a local newspaper, but across the sea. The contention of Mukherjee Commission that the local newspapers in Taiwan did not carry any news of 18th August crash is not true. Journalist and Harin Shah, as I told you before, confirmed that now I remember the names of the two papers. The two local Chinese newspapers were Taiwan Didi Ximpao and Taiwan Daily. Taiwan Didi Ximpao and Xing Sung Pao, or some name like that. They had done just that. And over there, a brief opportunity was also came out. So JMCI looked up a wrong paper, Central News Daily News, a Kuomintang mouthpiece, then printed and published from mainland China across the sea as a local Taihoku newspaper. And there was no news in it. So he concluded that the crash incident was fake. So this is one incorrect thing that JMCI concluded. The commissioner also bungled up the height from which the plane fell. The JMCI's conclusion of a no air crash on 18th is based on a glaring misrepresentation of existing evidence from a first-hand witness. Netaji aide and fellow traveler Habibur Rahman did never say that the plane fell from a height of 12 to 14,000 feet. This, he said, while he was traveling between Tauren stop before
the previous leg of the flight.
Previous leg. The plane was flying at that height, 12 to 14,000 feet, and he was feeling chilly. So he put on a sweater or something like that. Now, this commission report just copy-pasted that figure into their conclusion that the plane fell from, a Taihoku fell from that height. So this was a very big mistake. Another one is that the Republic of China, that means Taiwan, did not advise the Mukherjee Commission or anyone that there was no air crash. They said rather that they had no evidence in their records of such a crash. And that's not surprising, given that Japanese civilian and military forces remained in full control of Taiwan until their withdrawal on October 25th, 1945. And they just handed over some notes, not all. So looking up past part report, and they're saying that the crash didn't happen. So they never said the crash didn't happen. They said the records they have say they don't find anything mentioned in the crash. Then he mentioned another thing incorrect about the head priest of Renkoji Temple. The head priest of Renkoji Temple, the Reverend Mochizuki, did not deny access to the reported remains of Netaji. Nor did he, nor the government of India and Japan expressly informed the government of India through its ambassador that no objection to getting his thing. Rather, they were willing to hand over the ashes for the remains. Rather, we should call it remains, not ashes, the remains for DNA testing. But the commission wrote down that the priest did not agree to hand over the ashes. This was incorrect mentioning because the letters are there of the head priest. But the real mystery to me is, while the commission meticulously visited the archives in Russia, they never queried the Japanese government for anything, despite Netaji being in their care when he was last seen. They made no attempt to access the 5 Netaji files, still kept secret then in Japan. They interviewed just a single person in the country and came out. Now, these errors, omission and commission, raise the question whether the Mukherjee Commission was looking for those leads, which now tie up with what Professor Gordon was commenting. Reading is whether the Mukherjee Commission was looking for those leads that could be construed as contradicting the previous inquiries. And contrary to what is rumored among the people, some section of the people, that the Mukherjee Commission they say was not discussed in Parliament and it was rejected summarily. But no, the Mukherjee Commission report was discussed in both houses of Parliament in May and July 2006. And 13 MPs from different parties participated in those discussions. Then the government placed a 26-page action-taking report at the end of these deliberations. And August 7th, 2006, the Home Minister explained in Parliament that the JNCI had not completed its preliminary mandate, that is answering where, when, and how Bose died. In addition, glaring shortcomings, here the government also found out these shortcomings, had been exposed in its investigation. Hence, after taking due care of the observations, the government would reject its findings. But just like the many conspiracy theories, what goes wrong, even today, that Mukherjee Commission finding was rejected without assigning any reason. But now, of course, the government has clarified a number of times through replies, through this RTI replies, and otherwise also through the literature, that the mystery is over and Netaji did die in 1945. There's no mystery actually. We are making up stories. I would rather put the blame on the media. They take it as a sort of masala thing to boost their TRP and all. The matter is all solved. Even the government of India has solved it. There's no mystery.
Yeah, and that is where I want to come to Dr. Dasgupta, because I think you wanted to say something, but before maybe you make your point, maybe you can add my query to you as well. I have seen you speaking in many forums where, of course, you take reference to the Prime Minister's initiative towards declassification of the files in 2016, which is in fact a very commendable action. And when we look into the declassified files, Dr. Dasgupta, it is very, very clear that all the pointers are towards acknowledging that the Renkoji ashes are Netaji's, the correspondences and the interactions happening with the priests, even the fact that on this date, when Renkoji holds a memorial in honor of Netaji, they invite the officers of the Tokyo consulate, and the ambassador assigns a deputy chef de mission or someone to join. So under the weight of all these actions, which the government has rightfully done, can you tell us what is holding back the government from officially supporting the ashes or the DNA test, or even officially declaring that the air crash theory is the actual theory, everything else is farce? Can you just help us throw some light on that?
You know, I think you've taken a view of governance and history as being black and white, and that it's our job to get to the truth. Unfortunately, in history, there's something, the truth is never, absolute. And in this case, what I think we can and best do is remove as far as possible some of the clutter, some of the relevant questions from the irrelevant questions. Now, there are, as I pointed out, the relevant question is that there are gaps in the documentation. And there is also a context which can explain why there are gaps in the documentation because of the circumstances of the war. That is the reality. We have, on the other hand, quite a lot of formidable eyewitness accounts of it, and other things like newspaper reports, which Mr. Roy Chaudhary pointed out. And I think one of the biggest problems which the Mukherjee Commission, I'm sorry, I can't talk about what it is, what the Mukherjee Commission failed to do was that it was guilty of some of the most amateurish mistakes, which is possible. And best thing, they should have got a translator. Secondly, when we talked about this, the declassification of the existing Indian files, Most of it has been declassified. There's only one Defense Ministry report which still remains, but which I met somebody who's had a preview of it, and where it said, there's a note from Dialogues. This report says Subhash Bose died in the plane crash. Pointing it because it's not going to be believed, so he just put it away, and it's remained in that way. But that history of the INA by the Defense Ministry report, should I believe, so the other, please the classification of all existing papers is, I think, a must. And I think it is necessary. I think the good offices of the Indian government should be used to get the Japanese to declassify the ones which are in their custody, whatever is in their custody. Finally, we come to this larger question of why the Renkoji. There have been various times when the Prime Minister has been to Tokyo, where they've actually not been able to go to the Renkoji Temple because in the fear of because of the fear of an outcry. Are these Subhash Bose's ashes? No, as I said, most of the evidence points in one direction, but you can never have anything which can be called conclusive in the context of those times. There will always be that question. What Anita talked about, the feeling which Saurabh Bose had. He had a feeling. And she also explained very wonderfully, the sort of background, the relationship of the person with it. Now that feeling becomes the truth. No, and I must say that the story of Gumnami Baba, which has been peddled, is a fascinating one. If it wasn't fiction or fact, I don't know. But it's a great, compelling story. People love that sort of story.
I call it Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction.
No, what you call it is not the thing. The point is, it's believed. A lot of people love to believe it because it fits in with their theory that there was a monumental conspiracy involving the Gandhi Nehru family against Subhash Chandra Bose, and this is part of that larger narrative. And this narrative is going to stay at permanently, regardless.
Could I?
Now, at least the story. Now the story of Subhash Bose's reappearance, at least, has more or less receded and gone out of the window. But till the 1960s, that was a live issue.
Could I just throw in a couple of little things?
You may actually point out these things that.
Yeah.
We'll come to you. Yes, Professor Gordon, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just want to put in a couple of
Anita ji also wanted to say something.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, in my book, I've quoted an immediate response from Saurabh Bose, who accepted that there was a plane crash. Then maybe the feeling came later, but I've quoted a letter from August, September 1945, where he accepted that he had died in a plane crash. Then maybe somebody said, oh, well, maybe there's not enough evidence. Maybe he escaped again. And then the feeling may have been there. How could I lose my beloved brother? So, but the immediate response was he died in the plane crash, and he accepted that. Then something came later. Before this later sadhu, there was an earlier sadhu, Sholmari Sadhu. And when I was in Calcutta in 1964, there was a Bengali book, Solmari Sadhu Rahasyo, The Secret of the Solmari Sadhu. And since there's this story about this sadhu, I lived in the Ramakrishna mission in Calcutta, and I said to all my Bengali friends, they said, oh, Shubhas is coming to a meeting in 24 Parganas, you must come. So I said this, if he is coming, wake me up, 3 a.m., midnight, anytime. I'm ready to come. Just, I want to meet him. It would be great for my research. I'm ready to go. anyone, nobody ever came. So that sadhu, actually, Surendra Mohan Ghosh, who was the leader of the Congress in the Rajya Sabha in the early 70s from Mymensingh, he was asked by Nehru to go and meet this sadhu, because even Nehru wasn't 100% sure. And Surendra Mohan Ghosh, who knew Netaji very well, said he went, he said, this guy is not Netaji. This is just a story. So that sadhu faded out. Then another sadhu came. Maybe we'll get another one. I don't know.
Anita ji, you
Yeah.
wanted to say something.
Yes, I want to add two things. One more sadhu story. Some of you may know of Dr. Leopold Fischer, alias Swami Agyananda Bharati. He was a very brilliant but very peculiar man. He was Austrian, claiming to be half Indian. He lived during the Second World War, and claiming to be half Indian, he was imprisoned together at the end of the Second World War with the members of the Indian Legion in Germany, and eventually went to India as a sadhu. And one has to add, Dr. Fischer was about 8 inches taller than Netaji. And some people sort of approached him because he was very fair and all that, and had a shaven head as the sadhu, that he was Netaji. And he would answer, say, look here, how can I be Netaji? I'm 8 inches taller than Netaji was. And then people would answer him, said, well, it would be no problem for Netaji to grow 8 inches. What do you want to say to that? And another thing I want to add regarding the Mukherjee report. There are many people who have read parts of the Mukherjee report, but few who have read every single line of it, including all the appendices. And the funny thing is, and frankly, I don't understand how Justice Mukherjee got involved in such a strange report, other than he was running out of time, because eventually, after 6 years of going about dealing with the subject, let's put it that way, he was put under pressure by the government to hand in the report. But the main text of the report does not tally with many of the appendices. Sometimes he writes some things which the appendices show in a were totally different. And the other thing which is peculiar, some of us got printed versions of that report sometime after it was published. And there were some documents in that version which are not, for example, in the online version of the Mukherjee report. And for example, there is one letter in Japanese which is in this more extensive appendices line, which was translated incompletely in a way which in fact contradicts what was in the original document. And so I'm very sad to say that as my fellow panelists have mentioned, the work on the report, probably by the staff, was shoddy.
Okay, just to pick up from there, if that is shoddy, what can we say? And I just want to say why this issue never settles. Based on that shoddy work, there is a director who creates a movie, and that movie is sold to the Bengali population during Puja Marsum. And believe it or not, that movie is launched on 18th of August. The poster is released on 23rd of January. And that's how it is being fed to the population as a new theory. So honestly speaking, we are almost time now, as I can see. I took 90 minutes from you. I would not hold you back, but I want to have your closing comments that we have heard all your public statements with regards to how you want the resolution of the issues. Can I? Okay, before I do that, Mr. Rajodri, yes.
Shoaib, I would like to bring out another thing which the rumor, to sort of counter the rumor, that many people talk about the dissentient report of Suresh Chandra Bose. Here, people are not told that, I'll put it sequentially, by June, all interviews, record checking, etc. were over, June 1956. And they sat down, the committee sat down to prepare a draft report. I'll do it fast, okay. The draft report, on concluding his inquiry, the committee which prepared the draft report, it contained principal points agreed to, where all three members signed. The principal points were: there had been an air crash at Taihoku on 18th August 45, in which Netaji met his death, and the ashes lying in Renkoji Temple in Tokyo are his. Now, Suresh Bose signed this, remember, and then suddenly when it came to for the signature of the final detailed report, he took a different view. Without interviewing anyone new, without seeing any other new records, suddenly he changed his mind and he did not sign the report. He submitted his dissentient report long after, well after the main report was signed, was submitted to the parliament and approved. He submitted his dissentient report in October, and the government, as usual, put the dissentient report in the parliament also. Shah Nawaz Khan disputed that, criticized that report, and challenged Suresh Babu. But Suresh Babu did not take up that challenge of Shah Nawaz. This, another myth, needs to be corrected. Suresh Babu signed the draft points of agreement. Principal points of agreement.
Yeah, just to add to that point, because I've read it in the declassified files, there was a lot of exchanges between Jawaharlal Nehru and Bidhan Chandra Roy to persuade Suresh Bose, and he was given a number of weeks in addition to make up his mind, etc., etc. But he did not return that courtesy, if I may say so that way.
Right.
So I think what I would like to do is I would like to
may I just add the final word?
Yeah, please.
You know, I mean, I just want to make two very simple points. One is that in the case of Subhash Chandra Bose, and I'm here speaking as someone who's been observing this thing rather than being a participant in it. One, in the life of Subhash Chandra Bose, there is a life of Subhash Chandra Bose, and there is a equally interesting afterlife of Subhash Chandra Bose. And I think this fits into this whole narrative. And I think because of the sheer interest in that, that story is not going to disappear. So if you're thinking in terms of getting a conclusive answer to that, it's not going to happen in a hurry. Secondly, and I think this, and I thank Mr. Roy Chaudhary for actually pointing out what has happened to Suresh Bose's dissenting report. Much of the controversy has been fueled and kept alive by what I can at best, and with due apologies to Anita ji, call the dissensions within the Bose family.
Right.
If this is a real issue, and I confront it every second day whenever anything remotely dealing with the national celebrations of Netaji are there, and you get, you invariably get caught in a cross current. You don't want to get caught into it, but there is a sort of, I'm sorry to say what my Nirod Chandra Chaudhary once referred rather irreverently to what he called a Netaji trading company shuru hoyeche.
Right. Right.
And I think if, with due apologies to everyone, I think that is one of the reasons why the Renkoji thing has not been resolved. That's one of the reasons why the conspiracy theories still float. And this is one of the reasons why I think we will never get a final closure of this issue, despite all the evidence which is there.
Noted. I think that's a very fair point. Professor Gordon, I will take a quick 30 seconds closing comment. If you had a wish that India should do to bring this issue to rest, what would be that wish list? 15 or 20 seconds from your side.
We can't make documents reappear that have been destroyed and will never be found. But I think that since the evidence is so overwhelming on one side, maybe not all black or all white, but pretty much all white in favor of the plane crash, let's have those ashes back and have a memorial to Netaji suitable in New Delhi, period.
That's headline for tomorrow. If there is any newspaper journal watching this Facebook Live, that's your headline for tomorrow. Anita ji, your comment, please. Anything that you have in your wish list that you have not already asked?
I certainly wish to have closure on this issue before I pass away. In fact, my oldest son kept pressing me to do that. He said, I don't want to inherit the problem. But one of the issues was addressed by Professor Gordon, that the remains should be brought back to India, and Netaji should be given a suitable memorial in connection with that. But there's certainly one factor which we have to take into account, and I was hoping to do something during this year, but with COVID, somehow one gets bogged down and is not able to travel. I think the technical know-how has improved a lot with regard to DNA testing. And I think one of you mentioned that the remains in Renkoji are not just ashes. There are pieces of bone. There is a tooth, which actually was put in later on, I understand. But possibly with the present day know-how of DNA testing, it should be possible to extract DNA maybe from the, or at least part of the DNA from the remains, and one could test the remains with regard to the DNA relations referring to the mainly female line of relationship, because that DNA is more likely to survive, and possibly something can be done that. And one more thing, I think it was one of you mentioned the still classified documents Japan has. I would hope that they would be declassified, at least so that we can learn whether there is anything relevant and interesting in them or not. And very likely there isn't, but at least then we would know there isn't. And maybe there is something interesting in it. For example, maybe that some evidence about the death certificate of Dr. Yoshimi turns up, or something else that might convince those people who do not believe in the plane crash.
Mr. Rajodri, thank you, Anita ji. Mr. Rajodri, out of the researches that you have done, what else would you wish to do to contribute to a closure of this issue?
Actually, if you could get the 3 files from Japan declassified, you'll get the answer over there. That is one. And
Thank
the
you.
DNA test is, if possible, if it is technically possible, the DNA test will settle the matter permanently. But no, it won't settle the matter. But they'll say, the Jumamangers will say, keep on saying something, some excuses they will continue. But at least we'll be clear.
It will settle the matter for many people, not for all. I agree with you.
Yeah, it will be settled for.
And my last salvo is to Dr. Dasgupta. For the last 90 minutes, whatever we have discussed, is there anything that you see that's possible to take back to the Prime Minister, Home Minister, or External Affairs Minister to contribute to the closure? Is there anything that you have found that can be taken back to them?
Yes. Yeah, there are two things which are quite apparent from here. Number one, yes, I think the good officers of India should be put on Japan to try and release whatever the files, whether those files would give you the finality in any way, I do not know, whether they contain anything relating to his death or some of his wartime activities. It's a matter of complete conjecture. That's at the number. If the family can speak with one voice in future, at least issue of the Renkoji, then I think we'll be able to move on that front. And I think it's quite right that we should, a befitting memorial to Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose should be made. But of course, if we take Mr. Gordon's statement and make it in Delhi, I think that will be another controversy which will come about whether Calcutta or Delhi is. But at least, we will have come within inches of a near closure.
Thank you. I think that's a kind of at least brings closure to our discussion today. By Indian standards, we are just 4 minutes ahead than what was originally planned. We took 94 minutes instead of 90 minutes. I am grateful for your participation, Dr. Gordon from New York, Anita ji from Germany, Shobanda from Delhi, I guess you are right now there, and myself
I'm in Calcutta.
In Calcutta, okay. And three of us in Calcutta then, and thank you for your insightful, and I think anyone who looks into the recording of this will pick up a lot of important aspects and learn and understand. I've already seen requests of asking for the slides to be shared, and some other questions which you could not cover, but I think overall it was a very, very fascinating discussion that enriched me as a person and many other people who joined over Facebook and YouTube as well. Good night and stay safe. Just one closing comment. We come back with the Anita Dialogues again next month, in the month of September. And this time it is again on 18th of September. And as we have already discussed previously, September is the birthday of Sharad Bose, and we will discuss the great relationship between the two brothers next month. The Anita Dialogue continues here on this platform, and thank you for being with us, and looking forward to having you in the next episode again. Good night. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind. Thank you.